Okay, amazing. So I think we're live and ready to go. Welcome everyone to this webinar from wherever you are in the world. It's very early here in Nice at the UN Ocean Conference, and we're really grateful for those of you who joined from even earlier time zones, and those of you who are staying up late to join us now as well. I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch webinar for the Malta Manifesto, an urgent call to action to protect people and planet from the threat of catastrophic oil pollution from the 8,500 plus shipwrecks left scattered across the world's oceans by 2 world wars. My name is Ruth Boumphrey, and I am Chief Executive of Lloyd's Register Foundation, a global safety charity with a mission to engineer a safer world. Since 2023, we have partnered with Waves Group and the Ocean Foundation to convene an international community of experts known as Project Tangaroa to develop a global framework for the management of these potentially polluting wrecks. The manifesto being published today is a result of a series of workshops held by Project Tangaroa in 2024 and 2025 in London, Helsinki and Malta, and online, bringing together the community's collective experience and expertise on how to tackle this threat. We will be discussing the manifesto's call to actions with a panel and audience Q&A later in this session. If you have questions for our speakers, you can submit them at any time during the session using the Teams Q&A function. And Simon Burnay, Chief Executive of Waves Group, to present using the Teams Q&A function, and we will pick up as many as possible at the end. But first, I would like to introduce Mark Spalding, President of the Ocean Foundation, and Simon Burnay, Chief Executive of Waves Group, to present the Malta Manifesto. Mark and Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Simon, I think, is going to lead us off, and we're going to take turns on the slides. But just briefly, we've been really pleased to work with Lloyd's Register Foundation and the Waves Group and all of the partners who came together for this whole effort. And we're really excited to share this manifesto as a result of all of those workshops. Simon?
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ruth, for the introduction. And good morning to everyone, and welcome to the launch of the Malta Manifesto. So Mark and I have the pleasure to jointly introduce the manifesto. As Mark mentioned, I'll kick things off and bring Mark in as we go. But first, a little bit of background. In the genesis of what became this manifesto really came from our collective experience gained in assessing the condition and the pollution risk presented by wrecks from World War I and World War II over a number of years. And from this, things developed in a way that it became clear that we needed to move away from an emergency response approach, a reactive approach, to something more strategic and coordinated, to be proactive and to reduce what we believe to be the growing risk of pollution from these wrecks. As Ruth mentioned, in 2023, kindly supported by Lloyd's Register Foundation, Project Tangaroa was born to convene an international group of experts on the issue of potentially polluting wrecks and to develop an international standard for the assessment and management of them. So as the first output from that program was an open access book, Threats to Our Ocean Heritage, which is published by Springer. And following that, Project Tangaroa successfully convened the 4 workshops. So in the course of 1 year, we had workshops held in London, Helsinki, an online version of that for South America, and finally in Malta. And those workshops attracted over 400 people, all experts in this domain from around the world. Things came to a head, if you like, in Malta, the last workshop, which was conducted in March this year, which allowed us to distill everything that we had learned over the previous year in the previous workshops, and to gather all of the input from all of the attendees and experts, and allowed us to create this manifesto. And that is why it's called the Malta Manifesto. So before we get into the manifesto itself, helpful to remind ourselves what the problem actually is. The commonly accepted estimate is that there are at least 8,500 potentially polluting wrecks in our ocean globally. Many of these are known to still contain oil, as well as other harmful chemicals and munitions. And the estimates of the oil remaining in these wrecks run into the millions of tons. Now, with climate change and the impacts of that on our oceans, these wrecks are deteriorating at an accelerated rate. We know this. We have a growing risk of serious oil pollution occurring, with the inevitable impact that has on the local environment, societies, and the consequential cleanup costs, which will be very expensive and could run into billions of dollars. So our challenge, and therefore our objective, is to prevent that, to stop accepting that a reactionary response approach is the only way, and to develop the capability to deal with this growing risk strategically and proactively. That is, to stop oil from these wrecks becoming a very expensive cleanup operation. So our vision for this is to catalyze and create the cooperation that will transform these wrecks from environmental and safety hazards into well-managed sites, preserving their ecosystems, their cultural heritage, and protecting the local environment and the communities that rely on them. And that means taking action that is well-directed, is coordinated, and is timely. It means protecting our ocean so that it sustains life on our planet. So at that point, I'm going to hand you over back to Mark, who's going to take you through the guiding principles behind this.
Thanks very much. We really wanted to set some guiding principles that we all shared and that came out of the workshop discussions, so that we were all on the same page in what we are pursuing. The first of those was taking a precautionary approach, urging decision makers to adopt precautionary measures when the science on the risk is not absolutely certain, but the stakes are incredibly high. If one of these leaks and has a catastrophic failure, we have a serious problem and threat to blue economy, to food security, to tourism, you name it, in the locations where these exist. But we also spent a lot of time thinking about local agency and local knowledge, wanting to make sure that we understood what local knowledge there was, understand how important their contributions are to observing and spotting leaks when they begin, understanding that they have some capacity for emergency response, and that capacity needs to be improved and expanded, and that we have to have the equipment and forward-placed equipment to aid them when it's necessary. And all of this, kind of comes back to making sure that the burden of these leaks is shared equitably. And by that, we partially mean that many of the locations, say in the Pacific Islands, are places where they had no connection with the war, no connection with sinking the ships, but they are, at the ones who are at risk. And how do we avoid them impoverishing themselves doing these cleanups, and understanding how they can contribute and be part of the solution, but we can spread the burden. And then, of course, we want all of our solutions to be as sustainable as possible, so that we're not pulling oil out and creating another problem by not doing a good job of storing or disposing of it afterwards, as an example. Next slide. So on advocacy, we really have recognized that a lot of policy solutions are needed at the national and international level. The Nairobi Convention on Remediation of Wrecks doesn't cover military vessels. They're expressly excluded. So we're going to need some new international policies, and then have those reflected in national policy. And I'll come back a little bit later to finance and how that's going to have to be addressed as well. But right now, there is no existing framework for addressing this problem, and that is a huge gap for all of us. Simon, I think you've got the next few slides.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So in the second call to action, it's all about collaboration. So what we're calling for is global collaboration across flag states, which are those nation states that own the wrecks, the affected coastal states, international agencies, and all supporting organisation, and that does include industry and academia. And with that collaboration, we're looking to develop and adopt a globally recognised standard and a framework for the assessment, management and intervention for potentially polluting wrecks. But we do not expect that standard to be overly prescriptive or to create a fully uniform approach across the world. We recognise that local factors are very important and that local agency that Mark just referred to is important, so that this standard must enable local action where that is possible, but also to share that burden globally and internationally. And it must also recognise the challenges and complexities that come with ownership of the wrecks, the concepts such as sovereign immunity, and the existing policy frameworks that exist in terms of oil pollution response and such like. But it should provide the basis for working together to solve what is a common and a shared problem. And the idea is that we can solve this problem collectively. So the third call to action relates to response capacity and resilience. Many of these wrecks lie in territorial waters of nation states or their EEZ, and given the increasing risk of oil pollution from them, we believe it's critical that these wrecks are fully considered and included in regional and national response plans for pollution and resilience and contingency plans. In addition to that, marine spatial planning should also take account of them. For example, if we're setting up marine protected areas, which is an ongoing drive and a very positive one, then these wrecks absolutely have to be part of those considerations. What we're seeking to do is to maximise the use of existing programmes, both regional and national policies and resources wherever we can. However, within the manifesto, we do recognise that many areas where potentially polluting wrecks are an issue do not have those adequate resources. So we are calling for the development of those resources and capacity in parallel, so that we can increase local resilience where it is needed as part of the management strategy. Okay, Mark.
So I've already mentioned this a little bit, but the whole idea here is to make sure that our call includes the empowerment of those who are most at risk, enabling those communities to help have a role in the earliest stages of emergency response design, but also the design of prioritizing which wrecks needed to be addressed for prevention. And having their understanding of what's going on is absolutely crucial. And then tailoring things for local needs and for their circumstances is going to be absolutely critical. And we don't want to ever lose sight of the local empowerment concerns. Next slide. Now, I think you've probably already gathered that we have a very strong feeling about how urgent this issue is, how critical this issue is, and even have some very good ideas about the emergency response as well as the remediation and prevention, and how to include communities, where the wrecks are, all of that sort of thing. And so, as always, the most key issue, biggest concern, is how do we pay for doing the emergency response? How do we pay for the studies to determine which wrecks are most at risk and that we could do something to remediate and prevent things? And so we've spent a lot of time and energy thinking about financial recommendations, and these sort of fall into three major categories. Core financial principles, we want to establish multiple funding mechanisms, multilateral funds, regional mechanisms, entrepreneurial models, anything we can. We want to create a dedicated finance task force that has specialized financial expertise, cross-sector relationships, and some authority to develop and implement innovative funding solutions. We want to align existing multilateral and regional funding, coordinating with regional development banks such as the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and the European Bank for Redevelopment, and create funding mechanisms that are internationally legitimate, regionally responsive, and are engaged by the donors to those banks. Next, we want to look at funding innovation. We want to learn from proven global models, examining success from transnational funding mechanisms such as Gavi that dealt with immunizations, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, the Montreal Protocol Fund, Climate Investment Funds, Green Climate Fund, UNITAID, and adapt those to this application. We want to also enable entrepreneurial solutions to try and create for-profit incentives for addressing this problem. And then we want to have a conversation about addressing moral obligations. Who are the stakeholders who benefited from maritime activities who should contribute proportionally to remediation, preventing non-combatant states, coastal states, from bearing an unfair financial burden for the problems that they did not create. Lastly, we want to actually do something. We want an implementation framework, a rapid response capacity, performance-based funding, transparency and accountability for the funds, and an effort to make sure that we create a system where the revenue streams are sustainable and meet needs. Simon, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. One of the things that the manifesto highlights very clearly is that we do know how to manage these risks. There have been some very good and tangible examples of assessment and remediation of potentially polluting wrecks already. We'll hear a little bit more later on in this session about one of those that's happening right now. But it's happened, but it's piecemeal and it's resource limited. So it's limited in its scale and capacity. And professionally conducted surveys of these wrecks and potentially oil removal operations are by their nature expensive. So what we're calling for is action to build that scale and to build the capacity with the necessary technology, to develop new technology to improve our ability and the efficiency in managing these wrecks. And that aligns to Mark's previous call to action about the funding. We have to make it more cost effective. And we can do that through various means. One is sharing valuable resources such as research vessels for data acquisition. We can accelerate research and development efforts to reduce technology gaps and to help democratize and reduce the cost of the solution to the potentially polluting wreck problem. And all of that creates collaboration. And with collaboration, we share experience, we share knowledge, and we share expertise towards that common goal. So we're calling for much greater sharing of data relating to potentially polluting wrecks, from everything from the archive materials through to survey data of the wrecks, all the way to using that wreck imagery and models, if you like, for cultural heritage purposes. And by increasing the sharing of the data, we will better understand the problem at a local and a global level, and we can make better decisions about the actions that are needed to deal with each wreck and groups of wrecks. So we'll be making decisions led by evidence and led by objective data. These wrecks have a story to tell, and that story is fundamentally a human story. So in order to share that story and preserve the evidence of them, we have to share that information and share that data. And we cannot do that if those wrecks are permanently damaged or long-term damaged by oil pollution. And then back to Mark for the final.
Yep. So as is in the chat and is on this slide, you can read the Malta Manifesto online at the Lloyd's Register Foundation. We are inviting you all to play a role. We would like any of those who are involved in the workshops and anyone else who feels compelled to support the manifesto and demonstrate to all of the stakeholders that there is a broad support for this effort and a broad support for doing something about this problem. I think that we wrote this, we circulated it among the workshop participants, and so I think we're very confident that this is our best effort to consolidate and share our findings, our recommendations, and the calls to action that they're absolutely critical. So let me stop there, and if people have questions, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark and Simon, and we're going to come on to a panel and questions in a little while. Just pulling out from what you said, my reactions about the urgency here, about the need for local agency, and the fact that we do know what to do. This isn't something that needs more research or anything, although it clearly does as well. But we need to get on with this now. So, talking of getting on with it, the manifesto sets out what needs to be done to tackle the issues of wrecks at a global level, and there are already good news examples of action being taken and what we can learn from. So we're going to take the opportunity now to go live to one of those examples by speaking to Matt Skelhorn and Harriet Rushton from the UK Ministry of Defence's Wreck Management Programme, who are with an expedition to survey the wreck of HMS Cassandra in the Baltic Sea. Matt, can you tell us about where you are, what you are doing, and how this links to the Malta Manifesto?
Thanks very much. I'll get Harriet to do the introductions first, if that's all right.
Hi everyone. So we're currently sitting on the Vina in Denmark, just waiting for everything to come on board for us to go and survey HMS Cassandra in the Baltic. So Matt and myself, we constitute the MOD Salmo Rex team. So we manage the inventory of potentially polluting wrecks around the world that sank when they were under MOD jurisdiction. And that constitutes around 5,700 wrecks. And what we're currently doing is, as I say, we're waiting on board the Vina to go and survey HMS Cassandra, who sank just off Estonia just after the First World War. And she's currently sitting there waiting for us to go and survey her to figure out what sort of state that she's in, so we can then sort of project into how we might appropriately manage her moving forwards.
Thanks, Harriet. Yeah, so start the survey. The ROV's just coming on board. We'll be heading out to sea fairly shortly. And yeah, it promises to be a very interesting job. We are going to look at Cassandra at the request of the Estonians. So they've identified her as a pollution concern. We're going out to do the survey. Now, we're not doing this by ourselves. We've partnered up with Waves Group. We've got Mark Lawrence. I won't swing the camera around to embarrass him. And Stuart Leather with us on the bridge here. Yeah, it is part of our wider wreck management program, and it's something we've been doing for quite a few years now. But we've been aware that we're not doing it in isolation. Other countries do have wreck programs, but more effort is required. So we've been taking part in Project Tangaroa since inception, going back over a year now, and we very much welcome the work that it has done and the introduction of the Malta Manifesto as well. It's been a fantastic catalyst for bringing together a huge range of stakeholders drawn from government, academia, industry, NGOs, and also, as mentioned earlier, those impacted groups, those folks who, really could be potentially impacted by the oil and the pollutants that remain on these wrecks. So all being well, the Cassandra intervention could serve as something as a blueprint for how this work is done going forward. There are other examples, but we're hoping to use this as an exemplar. Now, we don't yet know whether we're going to have to remediate Cassandra. It depends on what we find during the survey. But if we do, this will be very much sort of taking things through, working with Tangaroa, working, with the sort of like firm foundations of the Malta Manifesto to address the problems potentially posed by this wreck. So, hopefully everything will go well. We'll be working very closely in future with Tangaroa, and yeah, great. We thoroughly welcome it.
Fantastic. So much. Thank you so much to Matt and Harriet, and it's just been great timing, hasn't it? It's very exciting for us all to see you actually on location getting action done. So what a great contribution to this webinar. So moving on, as the Malta Manifesto makes clear, one of the challenges of potentially polluting wrecks is that they can be at once both environmental hazards and significant heritage assets. And we would therefore like to give the first opportunity to comment on the manifesto to two organisations who have been instrumental in supporting Project Tangaroa from the beginning: the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, and the International Union for Conservation on Nature, IUCN. So first, I'm going to give the floor to Chris Underwood, who is President of ICOMOS and the International Committee on Underwater Cultural Heritage. Over to you.
Thanks, Ruth, for the invitation. Thanks to the organisers for giving us the opportunity to speak about Project Tangaroa and potentially polluting wrecks. Listening to everybody that's spoken before, I could take phrases from all of those comments and put them into an underwater cultural heritage methodology for investigation of shipwrecks. I think this is why ICUCH, which is the, let's say, the scientific committee that deals directly with underwater cultural heritage, is so pleased to and supportive of the Malta Manifesto. It just provides clarity on the risks and consequences. This has all been said, of course, and describes a roadmap aimed at promoting preventive action. These things, and I'm just essentially repeating, but I think in a sense it just explains why we as a scientific committee and my parent organisation, ICOMOS, are so pleased to be involved. We've been involved from the very beginning. We've witnessed both the looking for solutions, looking for the problems, looking for all of those things that have been very carefully identified by Simon and Mark in the privy, and Matt and Harriet, of course. The Cassandra has been mentioned already, and I think from an underwater cultural heritage perspective, it just reminded of that many of these wrecks are also the last resting place. And as Simon said earlier, we must be absolutely clear that minimum disturbance of the shipwreck, and certainly anything that may have be the resting place of its crew, has to be of prime importance. Again, it's another big tick in the box for underwater cultural heritage management. I'm not going to repeat the calls, but we support them 100%, and we just look forward to the next phase of Tangaroa.
Thank you so much, Chris, and that's such an important reminder of the multifaceted nature of these things. And it's actually people, it's human beings. There are so many very sensitive issues, in addressing this problem of the wrecks. I'm going to ask now for a response as well from Joao Sousa from who is the Senior Program Manager at IUCN. Over to you, Joao.
Hi, I hope you'll hear me well. So I work for IUCN in the Ocean team, and we work at a high-level policy, all down to grassroots organizations that deal with a lot of problems related with biodiversity. And one of the things that I would bring and highlight, not to take too much time, under this fantastic collaboration and project, in terms of the most important aspects of the manifesto, I would like to highlight inclusiveness and respectfulness from, again, the departed, but also its empowerment capacity for the living. Mostly, I would also like to highlight the capacity to generate data. That is knowledge, and knowledge is to be shared for common benefit. We are a science-based organization, and of course, we use this data to advise policy and to write and define policy. And this is one of the most interesting aspects here, because of course, IUCN stands behind biodiversity and also livelihoods. And we must not forget that, for instance, we have been having a lot of conversation in terms of how to in power conservation around the world, what role finance plays, and we cannot, for instance, bring investments into the field without considering this as a major potential source of destroying all those investments that are made in the long run. So again, having the concern of biodiversity from one side, livelihoods, and also understanding the complexity of chemical legacy issues, we stand and fully support the manifesto. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joao. So, to further discuss the manifesto calls to action, we're going to invite some more panel members to join us. They are Polly Hill, who works to improve oil spill preparedness globally at Ipieca. Polly is not representing Ipieca today, but brings extensive previous experience managing RECs for the UK Ministry of Defence, as well as an academic background in REC assessment. We also invite Matt Carter, who is Research Director at the Major Projects Foundation, who has just returned from a REC survey expedition in the Solomon Islands. And we also welcome back our previous speakers to join the discussion. Please do join us now. Remember, you can continue to submit questions to any of the speakers through the Teams Q&A function, and we will get to as many of them as possible after this panel discussion. So have we assembled our panel? Lovely. Good. So let's get to it. The first question is, we've already touched on the multifaceted nature of these RECs as both environmental hazards and heritage and biodiversity assets. The manifesto calls for policy solutions that address this complex reality. So Matt Carter, can you suggest what these solutions might be, please?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. So firstly, essentially we're covering a lot of space that's already been covered by Simon and Mark. But when we're looking at policy solutions in relation to potentially polluting RECs, it is a really complex problem. So we need to be able to adapt and use a whole different range of policy solutions. Now, these will need to range from the legislative, regulatory, operational, and also the diplomatic. So a range of different policy tools that are going to have to be applied. Now, significantly, just listening to the presentations before, these policy solutions are going to have to react to a complex reality, but also do this in a timely fashion. So in terms of the complex reality, this is where we need new policies that are specifically tailored to potentially polluting RECs. A lot of the existing policies, procedures, operational and otherwise, don't fit specifically to the potentially polluting REC problem. So new tailored policies will need to be made. When we're looking at the timely action, this is something I guess I've had more experience with in the Pacific, is when we're looking at how can potentially polluting RECs be incorporated into existing policies, practices, and plans related to the environment and heritage more generally. And I think, again, going back to our experience in the Pacific, this is an area where Project Tangaroa can make strides in quite a fast way. So by supporting these Pacific nations, for example, and helping them build capacity in things such as marine spatial planning, heritage protection of their shipwrecks, and also contingency planning for oil spills. All these kind of different areas, these policies will strengthen the way that we can operate and bring the ideals of Project Tangaroa to action.
Thanks so much, Matt. I'm happy for anyone else to come in on that question, or I can move to the sort of next topic. And the next topic is the importance of local knowledge and locally led decisions on REC management. And this is stressed throughout the manifesto and has been stressed by all our speakers today. So how do we make this a reality? So Chris, I'm going to go to you first on that. And Chris, I'm not sure if your camera is turned on.
Okay.
There you go, lovely.
Well, thanks, Ruth. As part of my role within Underwood Cultural Heritage is dealing with local communities. And certainly, let's say, conference in the past has absolutely focused on the rights of local communities that often get overlooked. And this is really in the context of climate change, but that's related to this project as well. And that I think they have to be at the top of the list. And there's lots of anecdotes about giving advice and the equipment not surviving for all sorts of reasons, simply because the local islanders were not consulted. So it's about making partnerships and close partnerships with these people, and they have to be real and provide the support that's been highlighted by Mark and Simon. And resources are important, but it's not just the resource, it's giving them a definitive role in the management of these sites and realizing these sites are part of their shared history and heritage. All of those things are in the mix. And in fact, take another hat off, and we do a lot of this work in capacity building. And one of the aims is to develop local trainers, not just people that fly in from the Northern Hemisphere, the experts, so-called experts. Instead of just teaching them and they're part of the, let's say, the schooling, they become the trainers, and it's local advocacy. And those things are, very front and center in what Tangaroa is expecting to do. Fully support that.
Thanks, Chris. Matt, you've just come back from the Solomon Islands. Is there anything you'd like to add in there from what you've been learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when we're working with local communities, they're the people on the ground. They're the ones who are seeing the oil slicks and the impact it's having on their marine environment. Working with them and building capacity within these communities, it's the first line of defence. They're going to be the ones who get on the phone and call up the Environmental Protection Agency to say that their local wreck is leaking more than usual. So it's all about working collaboratively. And I think this goes back to the resourcing as well. We need to look at it in a very broad way. It's not just the remediation, it's not just the survey, it's building that relationship and the capacity locally, and for it to be like a holistic and a long-term sustainable program.
Super. Thanks so much, Matt. Now I'm going to go over to you next, Polly, and draw on your deep expertise in this subject. The manifesto has highlighted barriers in accessing existing oil spill response capacity for spills from legacy wrecks. So how can we overcome these?
Thanks, Ruth. So we've heard how we've got some unique challenges with these legacy wrecks. They're old. A lot of them are located in quite remote areas, particularly the Pacific and around the Caribbean. They're not covered by modern liability frameworks, and there's some disagreement over who's responsible for these wrecks, which causes real issues. And there are also cultural differences in how the wrecks are viewed by different cultures, and I think we should always bear that in mind as well. And in terms of oil spill response, I think it's important to stress just how time sensitive an oil spill response is. If you've got an oil spill coming out of a wreck, you really need to get boom around it as quickly as possible, because otherwise it's washing ashore, especially in places like the Pacific where the wrecks are very near shore. If you don't get boom around it straight away, that's just washing up against the shoreline, and you've got very sensitive shorelines there. You've got mangroves which just don't recover for decades from an oil spill. You can't clean them, and they're really important fisheries. Fish nurseries, so it has really major impacts on the fisheries for generations of fish. So it's really important to get the equipment out there straight away. So therefore, you obviously need local stockpiles of equipment, and as Matt and Chris have already said, this has to be done in consultation and in partnership with the people living there. They need to know what's happening. They need to buy into this response strategy, and they need to know what they're doing, and they need to be supported internationally as well. They're the first responders, but then the international community needs to come and support them as well.
Thanks so much. Oh, sorry, Polly, you carry on.
I was just going to say, but also it's not just a problem in the Pacific. Even in the UK, we've got loads of response equipment, but the wrecks in the UK are managed by two different departments. So you can end up with a bit of a standoff because they're like, oh, well, it's your wreck. And we don't always know whose wreck it is, because not all of the wrecks have a location, a position for them, or they may have been incorrectly identified. So, like as Simon said, they need to be just included in the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. No worrying about whose wreck it is, just we need to protect the environment.
Yeah.
So let's react.
So
And then the last point, I wanted to just reiterate what Simon was saying. It has to be a proactive response to wrecks. We can't just wait for them to fall apart and leak. We have to take the oil out as quickly and as efficiently as we can, because oil spills are just bad news. We want to get it out in a controlled way so that we can protect the environment and protect the people. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Polly. Yeah, it seems like there's some universal problems, aren't there, about fragmentation. So let's move on, and I'm going to come to Matt Skelhorn back on board, and Simon on this question, which is about the recommendation about adoption of globally recognized assessment and intervention protocols and standards. So how should we develop and implement these? So Matt, you're in the middle of something right now. Tell us about that, and then I'll move to Simon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. It does pose a challenge, but I think the good news is that we're not working from a blank sheet of paper. There are some excellent examples of wreck management around the world. For example, Norway and Sweden have some very developed wreck programs and methodologies for working through and doing that work. And similarly in the UK Ministry of Defence, we do have an established protocol for prioritising our wrecks, going out and surveying them, and then carrying out interventions. I think the issue though there is that these are very much being developed at the country level. They are not globally applied standards. So the challenge is to take the best practice from all of those exemplars, if you want to call them, and then make sure or try and implement agreed standards at the global level. It all strikes me as eminently doable, and I think through the agency of Tangaroa as a catalyst for global interest and action, that we've got a real opportunity to make that happen. So that's my two penneth. Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ruth. I would completely echo and agree with what Matt's saying. There are some really good examples of procedures or methodologies for managing wrecks around the world, and it's about not reinventing the wheel. We don't want to throw those out. It's to use the best bits of those, but apply it or create something that's globally applicable, but deployable regionally or locally, and that's really the key. So it's cherry picking, if you like, the best bits from each, and producing something that will, by collaborating together, which is exactly what we've been doing over the last year or two, and producing something that we hope will gain that support at all levels, from very high level global agencies at a UN level, and we, as we know, we already have some of that support, right down to the local deployment level. And for me, it's all about assurance and certainty, and giving people who we hope will come on board to support what we're trying to do, that assurance and that certainty in the outcome, that the work is being done properly and that the money is being well spent. And that's got to be the key thread throughout for me.
Thanks, Simon. And moving then from sort of protocols and standards to data, the question of data, the manifesto calls for increased access to data to inform decision making. To what extent is this holding back effective interventions, and how do we improve on that? So Matt on board, I think we've got you again on this question.
Thanks, Ruth. Again, it's a challenge, but it's a solvable challenge. So I think there are two separate strands to the issue. There's the archival data question. We know an awful lot about where ships sank in the broadest sense of the term, which ships sank and roughly where they ended up. But then knowing in detail what actually was on those ships and where exactly they sank is an ongoing issue. Now, if you're sat next to the UK National Archives, based in Kew in London, you've got access to a fantastic resource. But that is, if you're somewhere else in the world, you haven't got access to, or you're not able to physically get to those archives, accessing them is a challenge. However, we have seen some fantastic initiatives that are making that sort of global access a lot easier. And the Lloyd's Register Foundation's digitisation of its ships plans and other holdings is a fantastic example of that. It's a crucial asset for us. And millions of documents digitised, available online. So many of our wrecks, although we deal with British military wrecks, actually started off as merchant vessels. So having access to all of that information is crucial. There is also, I think, at a local level, some really a number of really exciting initiatives, these sort of citizen science initiatives going on at the minute, where we're seeing local stakeholders getting together to sort of really look in detail in those wrecks. So, for example, Nick DeVoe's team out in the Caribbean are doing fantastic work looking at polluting wrecks and other wrecks in Caribbean waters. We've seen some really good projects, for example, Peter Knott, Nautical Archaeology Society, her work to do citizen science projects around the UK, engaging with local divers to mine their knowledge on wrecks. That's the sort of archival thing. So there's some really good examples of how we can better use those resources. In terms of what's on the seabed, always a big challenge. One of the challenges we face, which was picked up by Polly, is that quite often we know that a wreck is on the seabed, but actually identifying it correctly, actually putting a proper name to it, is often quite a challenge. Wrecks have been misidentified down the years, and that poses big challenges, because if you don't know the name of a wreck, then how on earth are you supposed to risk assess it? You know, what was on it, what was it doing at the time of loss? So, you know, surveying is always a challenge. It's expensive. I think those costs are coming down, and we've seen, you know, potential ways through the weeds in terms of dealing with this. So, for example, Innes McCartney did a fantastic study on wrecks off the coast of Wales a few years ago, where he looked at relatively cheaply collected multi-beam data of wrecks. He was then able to compare them to the ship's plans and then come up with, you know, a better identification of wrecks on the seabed. And then having access to things like the Lloyd's Register Foundation ship's plans archives digitally makes doing that kind of thing a lot easier. So it's trying to get the costs down. It's getting, again, that local engagement. It's making this sort of work accessible to people. And I think it's a fascinating thing. So it's not difficult, generally speaking, to get people engaged and interested in doing this work, but it's just making it more available to more people.
Thanks so much, Matt. And really appreciate also the sort of shout out to the work that my colleagues in the Lloyd's Register Foundation are doing to get all that information out there, to share it, to make it transparent. You know, amazing team there putting that all out there. So Simon, I'm going to come to you with a big one, and then we're going to finish with another big one. So at the heart of the Malta Manifesto is a message that we already know at a technical level, through all of the great work, that we know how to manage these wrecks. The challenge is marshalling the capacity to put that knowledge into action at scale. So Simon, how do we do that?
Thanks, Ruth. It's a big challenge. But as you say, we do know what to do. We know how to do it. There are examples where it has been done and is being done. We have the tools, but it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's a scale problem. So, for example, one of the tools that we use to assess oil volumes remaining in wrecks, there's only 3 or 4 of them available globally. So you can immediately imagine the problem that creates when we try to scale this up to thousands of wrecks to be assessed. So it's about, well, ultimately it comes back to the funding to make this happen. I think, you know, I don't want to put words into Matt Skelhorn's mouth, but it's a resource problem. I think the intent is there. Matt, feel free to disagree if you want, but it's about doing it when it's possible at the moment. What we want to do, of course, is to make that proactive, to coordinate it globally, and to share the knowledge of how to do it, so that those at the front end of it who are experiencing the problems, i.e. dealing with oil spills, know where to go to get that response and to deal with the problem. So I'll give you some examples of how we can do it. One is looking at the use of research vessels, so scientific research vessels that are at sea, sharing that resource as platforms to gather the data that we need, rather than mobilizing vessels individually for each wreck that needs to be surveyed. That will give you an economy of scale that's really quite significant. Similarly, rather than doing wrecks, surveying them and assessing them one at a time, we can do it in campaigns and do multiple wrecks in one mobilization. That will save millions of dollars. And it's such an easy thing to do, providing we've got the funding and the forward thinking.
Yeah.
And then, you know, very much looking at the research and development to improve the cost efficiency of things. So what Matt mentioned about using cheaper techniques to identify wrecks, that's fantastic. Also looking at scalable wreck assessment and survey methods. All of that feeds into a sort of R&D incubator idea to democratize the solutions necessary. So it's multifaceted, I think, is the answer, but very doable.
Yeah, and not short of ideas for how to do it as well.
No, no.
So we're coming into the last 10 minutes of our workshop here. I'm going to start moving over to the audience Q&A, and I'm going to ask Mark to be on standby to answer the first question. But also, Mark, you and I were recently at the Blue Economy Finance Forum. We had some amazing. We heard that there's a lot of finance as well available. So I'm going to start with a question for you, Mark, which has come in from the audience. But if you wanted to also finish that off with your comments on any finance, that would be lovely. There's thank you for launching this important and much needed project. This is from Manu Mangal. Thank you, Manu, for your question. Given the cross-border nature of potentially polluting wrecks and the complexities around sovereign immunity, how does Project Tangaroa plan to address legal liability and incentivize nations to cooperate, particularly when many of the affected coastal states were not participants in World War I or World War II?
So to oversimplify, these are military vessels, and they therefore have sovereign immunity. So there is fundamentally no absolute legal liability. I think that the flag states who were combatants in World War II have been very clear, however, that they feel a moral responsibility. They have come to our workshops, they've participated in our workshops, they've discussed contributing to helping to solve the problem. And so I think the question then just becomes, what is the finance mechanism for doing so, and what is the sort of policy framework that will enable that? And so I think part of what we plan to do in our next steps is really work with the International Maritime Organization to expand the remit of the Nairobi Convention on addressing shipwrecks, working with UNESCO regarding the cultural heritage aspect of these wrecks and their status as war graves, and anything else we can to create the framework to hang their hats on, if you will, to jump in. And then, of course, we'd begin looking at the financial mechanisms, which I can talk about a little bit more, such as the multilateral development banks and such as vehicles that the flag states are major donors to and can contribute to, and make sure this money is managed and channeled to the right actors to enable local capacity, but also international and global response.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Mark. Got a very interesting one now coming in from Connie Ying from the Hong Kong Maritime Museum in the China-Asia region. The museum serves as an educator role. What do you suggest for the public or any particular stakeholders to know more about potentially polluting wrecks? She's interested to connect people working in the Pacific Ocean and Northwest Pacific in particular, and she's also inviting connections. But yeah, how are we going to engage the public into this work? I'm going to ask Chris to see what your thoughts are on this to start us off.
Well, thanks, Ruth. I nearly dipped out on that one. I nearly sort of, what I think is the question is excellent, and what I think is the response is perhaps not as critically, let's say, clear as I would like. It's essential, in my view, that the public is involved, and raising awareness generally is absolutely critical to the success of Tangaroa or any other PPW project. If you look hard enough, and I think it's quite a simple, let's say, circular, non-conclusive, but without public support, politicians and policymakers don't tend to take much notice. If you motivate the public in the right way, those policymakers stand up, and policymakers can make decisions where finance becomes available. It's it's not a vicious circle, but it's a virtuous circle. But motivating the public, I think, is 100% has to be front and center of not just this project, but any project trying to raise funds.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Joao, I've seen some amazing things here in Nice from the IUCN, really engaging content. have you got any ideas around this about how to engage with the public on this issue?
Oh, well, each case is its case. 9 years ago, when I started working in plastic, was kind of the same. It was a non-issue. A couple of researchers mentioned full Mars being contaminated with plastic. One or two articles about dolphins, and that was it. Plastic was not a thing. So the point being that most people thought it was okay because it said recyclable on a package, just throw it to the garbage, whatever. So then it was not so much trying to find the culprits or pointing fingers, but trying to understand first the scale of the problem. And once the scale of the problem is out there and it becomes public knowledge, what do you do with it? It's again about cooperation. And this led into, as you probably know, about the INC Treaty, the Global Treaty on Plastic that is now being discussed in very difficult rounds because it's opposing producing countries from all the other countries that are more concerned with this, plastic producing countries. But again, it's a question of collaboration and transparency, but mostly it's about data sharing.
Yeah. And Joao, you know, speaking of that, and the next question has come in, and I'd like you to keep talking on this one, please. It comes from Liz Atwood, and she's asking, will additional data such as the location of particularly sensitive coastal habitats like mangrove, seagrass, coral reefs, or existing or planned MPAs be included in the global contingency plan? And this is to support building a roadmap for prioritizing the wrecks which pose a higher risk to coastal habitats and communities. Have you got your thoughts on that?
Well, I have my thoughts, and then I'll let Mark correct whatever I'm going to tell, or feel free to amend. I have a very on this ICN works above all with transparency. We did a mapping exercise for 6 countries where we try to understand everything related with waste. We can tell a lot about waste from a country just looking at the waste, but then again, when we look at waste, we start to understand there's a lot of sensitive data that I was not even aware, because this will give you patterns of consumption, and then patterns of consumption will tell you a lot about the health of those populations. And there's a lot of data that can go into insurance companies, private insurance companies. So there's like an infinite problems that are associated with this one. When it comes to data sharing here, for us, it will need to be shared data, because if I'm convincing an investor to put 10 million behind a mangrove restoration project, or for instance, and in the vicinity, there is something that potential will bring his investment down in the split of a second, all the return on investment for the next 20 years is gone. Of course, not to mention the potential loss of entire livelihoods that cannot fish, cannot do anything for 10, 15 years. People should know where it is and what are the risks facing if something like completely failure of the structure opens up and everything comes out.
Thanks, Joe. I'm gonna turn to Mark. We've got 1 minute left, Mark. There's another question come in, and if you want to add any final comments there. The question is from Manu again. Will the proposed international standard for potentially polluting wrecks assessment incorporate ESG or blue finance principles to unlock investment from the private sector? And how can this be aligned with marine insurers or risk underwriters to create sustainable funding models? So, Mark, you have probably less than a minute on one before we close out. Thank you.
The simple answer is yes, absolutely. We've just spent 2 days on the Blue Economy Finance Forum in Monaco and a day on Nature Finance in London, and we had this conversation in multiple arenas, and I think applying it to fixed equity bonds to address this issue, and then using ESG and blue finance principles to screen any investments or finance, or engaging parametric or other insurance is exactly how to go forward with this, with the precautionary approach I mentioned earlier and with sustainability in mind.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's well within time. So that's all, but that is unfortunately all we have time for today. I just want to thank all our speakers for their contributions and the panelists, and thank you all for joining us. You can read the full Malta Manifesto now on the Lloyd's Register Foundation website, and you'll receive a direct link by email after this event, as well as in the chat. Please do share this widely across your networks and use it to support your advocacy on potentially polluting wrecks. As the manifesto says, the time for concerted unified action is now. On behalf of the entire Project Tangaroa Coalition, thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Goodbye.